Welcome to On Our Watch, a podcast about coastal erosion and sustainability in Louisiana. My name is Marian Evans. I'm a filmmaker and a producer of the documentary On Our Watch, a feature-length film that examines Louisiana's coastal land loss crisis and the ways in which it impacts our communities, industries, and culture. The film's director, Jonathan Evans, and I are proud to produce this podcast series that will continue to explore issues facing the Louisiana coast through conversations with local residents, community leaders, and experts. On this episode, we're speaking with James Karst. James is the Director of Communications for the nonprofit organization, the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. And now, our interview with James Karst. Well, thank you, James, for joining us today.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start out by asking you a bit about your journey from being a journalist in New Orleans for many years and to becoming the Director of Communications for the CRCL, and what made you want to shift gears and get into coastal restoration?
Yeah, so I was a journalist for about 18 years in New Orleans at the Times-Picayune, and it was great. I loved it for the bulk of my time there. And one of the things that we very often covered was coastal land loss and issues related to that, climate change. Obviously, the hurricanes that have battered New Orleans and other parts of our state again and again. And, from a communications standpoint, it was always very interesting to me to learn about this stuff, to learn how complicated it was, complex it was, all the different agencies that were involved in different ways. And it's a communications challenge, I think, too. Like, how do you depict the disappearance of something, So it was just a remarkable aspect of my work there. And then I left in 2018, and I wanted to be more proactive in fighting for things that I believe in and causes that I support. And one of those is addressing coastal land loss. And, I'm fortunate enough to be with CRCL and fighting for that every day.
Yeah. And how would you describe your personal connection to the Louisiana coast? Seems like that was something you developed while you were at the Times-Picayune.
Yeah. Like I said, I worked there for about 18 years. I've been in New Orleans 23 years now. And I've experienced hurricanes and tropical storms. I have, spent the night at the newspaper because we weren't sure what a hurricane was going to do. I have, I lived here through Hurricane Katrina and was fortunate enough not to have my house flood or to experience personal devastation the way many other people did, but I saw what it did to our people, to the fabric of our city, the catastrophic effects that it had on our culture, and saw really sort of a divided effort to fix things, to correct things. I think that we've had success, but a lot of failures over the years as well. And so, to me, I really enjoy being part of trying to solve this unsolvable problem. And I see that we've made a lot of progress in the past few years and a lot of progress coming forward in the future.
Yeah. What did you learn from that experience of covering Hurricane Katrina and its aftermath, and how does that influence the work you do today?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think this is a very long time ago, but one of the things I remember is how there were not reliable sources of information. There was a lot of rumor that just spread and was taken as gospel. And I think that there was also clearly a misunderstanding of New Orleans and what was going on in the city by the national media, by the international media. And the people who really knew it best were the people who were here on the ground. And that's something that I think relates to everything. The people who best understand coastal restoration are the people who are out on the water in their boats, the people who live in the communities that are right on the water. So that's one of the things I learned. I also learned the importance of strong and competent leadership. When you're faced with difficult problems, devastating problems, you need good people working on it, and they need support of the people. So
yeah. And so, can you tell me a little bit about the CRCL, which is the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, and what it does and what its function is for the Louisiana coast?
Yeah, we were the first statewide nonprofit dedicated to addressing land loss in Louisiana. We started all the way back in 1988 when I was still in high school. And in the early years, we were largely a policy shop. I think the thing that we were dealing with then was helping people to understand that this problem was occurring and to sort of guide them along the path to address this problem. So we have online a paper that you can look at from, I think it was published in 1989, and it's called Here Today and Gone Tomorrow, ? And in that paper, we called for the creation of a state agency to confront coastal land loss. We called for funding mechanisms to pay for restoration. We called for the immediate implementation of large-scale restoration projects like sediment diversions. And so to me, it's really interesting to look back on that and see all these things that have come to pass. We now have the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. We have QIPRA, the BRO Act. We have large restoration projects that are underway. But that was what we did at the very beginning. We've since expanded our mission. Now we do things like plant trees and grasses across our coast from one side of the coast to the other. We're about to embark upon a project through which we'll be planting more than 30,000 bald cypress trees near New Orleans with a bunch of other organizations. We recycle oyster shell through our oyster shell recycling program. We've recycled about 14 million pounds of shell in a little bit less than a decade. We partner with restaurants to do that. We use hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers every year to do these boots on the ground projects. We also are involved in policy. We support science-based policy to restore our coast. We advocate for the protection of funding for coastal restoration. It should not be directed toward other things because we've got a very large problem. So we do all those things now. To me, the most important part of our work is that we give people a way to be involved in a solution. And we also bring in vastly disparate groups. So we partner with businesses, we partner with universities and colleges, we educate students, we just give people a variety of different ways to become involved. And I think that's important because when you look at climate change, you look at coastal land loss, you may feel that it's something too big for you to solve. And, it is, but you can do things that can have a positive effect, and they multiply when you become involved, when your friend becomes involved. You can really accomplish a lot, and we are doing that. It is succeeding. It's doing great things, and
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It does feel like such a big problem, but that doesn't mean you can't do things about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like when we talk about wetlands in Louisiana, a lot of people know that we're losing wetlands and it can feel kind of hopeless. But I think that sometimes people don't know about the good work that's being done by people and organizations like the CRCL. And I know you mentioned the oyster shell recycling program and the native plants program. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the restoration projects that you guys are doing that's helping the coast.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, we have been recycling oyster shell. That means basically we work with New Orleans area restaurants and others. We would love for every restaurant that sells oysters to be involved in this. But basically what they will do is they will save their oyster shell in a separate bin that our contractor comes and picks up a couple of times a week. He dumps it at our restoration headquarters down in Violet in St. Bernard Parish. And the shell cures for a few months in the sun. And then we work with volunteers to put it into marine grade mesh bags, biodegradable mesh. and they're about 30 pounds each, filled with oyster shell. And then we take volunteers to a reef location where we're going to build an oyster reef, like we did just a few weeks ago down at Pointe-aux-Chenes. And we work with boat captains and volunteers, and we move that shell from land onto the boats. And we take the boats down the bayou to where we are building our oyster reef, and we just stack them in the water. It's like building a wall out of bags of oyster shell. And what that does is it does numerous things. It creates habitat for baby oysters to grow. Baby oysters love to attach to a hard surface, and the ideal one for them is old oyster shell. So they attach to that, they grow on that. That's what makes it a living shoreline, because it's got oysters growing on it. And the fascinating thing about that is that when the sea level rises, the oysters that are growing on it will grow vertically as well, so it can adapt for sea level rise. It's very cool. And that also creates habitat for other species. You know, you'll get things that feed off the oysters, and then things that feed on the things that feed on the oysters. So birds, crabs, drills, oyster toadfish, you know, all kinds of cool things. And then these oyster reefs also slow erosion. So if you imagine rapidly moving water and very soft soil, the water scours away at that soil, but when there's a wall of shell in front of it, it interrupts that action of the water, and it slows erosion. We have measured a decline in the rate of erosion of as much as 50%, which is significant. That's the oyster shell recycling program. It's a wonderful program. More than 30 restaurants are involved in that right now. Our native plants program, like I mentioned, we plant cypress trees, we plant grasses, marsh grasses, subaquatic vegetation, beach dune grasses as well. And what that does is trees and other vegetation, they obviously put down roots into the soil or the beach, and that helps to anchor the soil. It gives it some structure, and so that's another great thing that we do. Like I said, we're doing about over 30,000 bald cypress trees, which is the state tree. And it's in an area called the Central Wetlands near New Orleans, Lower Ninth Ward, St. Bernard Parish. And this was an area that was thick forest, largely cypress, but was very heavily logged. And then there was the Mr. Go, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet shipping channel, that was cut through these wetlands in, I think, the 50s and 60s. That helped to introduce saltwater far north of where it had been and killed the remaining trees, killed a lot of vegetation. Well, the Mr. Go was closed off in 2009, and so the salinity level has recovered to close to what it would be naturally, and therefore trees will survive there again. So there used to be a forest there, it got wiped out. We're about to put it back there. So that's very exciting as well. But we do projects like that all over the state. We were just in Cameron Parish a couple weeks ago planting grasses out there at Little Florida Beach. That helps to anchor the dunes there and protects important bird habitat, migratory bird habitat. And of course, people live out there too, so that protects those communities to have land there. So yeah, we do a number of things like that.
That's awesome. It must be rewarding to see the progress in those different projects you have going on.
Yeah, it is extremely gratifying. I love to work in the office too, but I love to get out of the office and be on the water. And it's really wonderful to interact with members of the communities where we're working, to learn about them and to do something that is helping them, and also to meet, you know, the idealistic young volunteers that are working with us, as well as the idealistic old volunteers that are working with us. We get a variety of people who come and volunteer with us to do this. So it's always very energizing, very gratifying. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you about your perspective on the role that communication plays in coastal restoration efforts and how important that is in terms of reaching people and getting things done.
Yeah, I mentioned that my organization at the very start, our role was really in helping to people understand that there was a problem and that there were things they could do about it. And that has really been a success, a smashing success. Like, everybody knows about it now. Everybody supports the preservation, the protection of our coast. So, you know, it's been fun to be a part of that and exciting to be a part of that. And I always think about you know, people talk about the rate of land loss here They measure it in how fast a football field of land disappears. So I think that was a brilliant communication strategy to do that, because everybody knows how big a football field is, and everybody knows that if, football fields of land start disappearing every 100 minutes, then we've got a huge problem. So that I didn't conceive of that. That's before my time here, but I think
everybody's heard about that. Yeah.
They have. It's great. They talk about it all the time. So that's been wonderful. And it can be a challenge to talk about what has disappeared, like how do you show that visually? There are some cool things with maps, where they're like color coded. The state has these maps showing land loss over time, and you'll see that there's a lot of red on them where land is disappearing, and you'll see little patches of green. And I think that that's very useful. It sparks this question, like, well, what's happening where it's green, and what is the difference between that and where it's red? So I think that's very interesting. It's obviously a very science-heavy issue, and so I always have it in my mind, how will I explain this complicated scientific issue to somebody who is not a scientific person, And that's one of the things that I strive to do as a creative person. I think I talk about it in metaphors sometimes, that helps people to understand what's occurring. To me, one of the greatest things you can do to get a grasp on this issue is to get out on the water and see what's happening. You can also fly over and see things from the air, and see how it looks like Swiss cheese, and it's brown and doesn't look very healthy. And so there are visual tools like that that I think are really valuable. I would love to take everybody in coastal Louisiana out on a boat and say, look at this, or in the air. We'd need a lot of boats and a lot of airplanes, but it is really moving, and it does help you understand it. There's also in Baton Rouge, there's the LSU Center for River Studies, which is a really cool place to help people get an understanding of what is occurring and what's being done about it. So I would encourage people to go there. I know they have some days when they're open for people to visit. You should do it.
Absolutely. And so we were talking a little bit before the interview about how coastal restoration is something that kind of brings people together from all different backgrounds. Do you find that this is true, and that it's easier more now than ever to communicate these issues to people because everyone can kind of agree, yeah, we want to keep this land?
Yeah, I think so. It really is. That's exactly right. We do see like bursts of interest in our work, like after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We got a tremendous amount of donations, a tremendous amount of people trying to volunteer with us. So obviously that was a tragic event, an awful event, but people understand, people understand the need to preserve our wetlands, and I think that they are understanding more and more that they can and should have a role in that. One of the great things that we do at my organization is we give people really a variety of ways to get involved. They don't have to lug around 30-pound bags of oysters all day. They don't have to plant trees with us. They can do other things to get involved as well. Some of it is educational. We host a lecture series, for instance. We will sometimes write letters urging a specific action to be undertaken. They can do things like that. It's really something where we want everybody to be involved in finding a solution.
And so what's the biggest lesson you've learned so far in your career working in coastal restoration?
The biggest lesson? Yeah. I've learned a lot of lessons. I think I've done a good job of understanding that there are all these different voices. I think coastal restoration looks like different things to different groups, to different people, to different industries. And I have learned that it's really important to hear all of them. And a person may disagree with you, and you may never agree with them. And I think that's okay. I think it's important to have conversations with them anyway. And even if you understand that you're never going to be in agreement, there is agreement in some things. for instance, that our coast is worth saving, that we need to do it. And so, yeah, I've learned that. I've learned to try to find common ground with people. And, I've also learned to celebrate our successes. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. I think that we're on the right path. I think we've got a lot of work to do. So we have to keep working at it. We still need to reduce emissions. We still need to build projects that my organization has been fighting for 35 years, that we were saying 35 years ago, hey, this is urgent, and it still hasn't been built, So we need to continue to work toward our goals, but we're on the right path.
Very good. Well, thank you for talking to me today, James.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to On Our Watch. We hope you enjoyed our discussion with James Karst. Don't forget to subscribe to On Our Watch on your favorite podcast app to be notified about future episodes. You can also watch a video version of this podcast on YouTube, which you can find a link to in the description. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. This podcast is made possible through grant funds from the Greater New Orleans Foundation and executive produced by Bruno UK Steiner.